best way to live with diabetes is to not live with it alone. That's why Walgreens pharmacists are here for you 24/7 with expert advice and savings on medications and supplies. Just bring in your prescriptions. We can even show you how to get rewarded for healthy behaviors, like logging your glucose. Because Walgreens knows that taking control of diabetes takes an extra hand. Walgreens, at the corner of happy and healthy.
Get a free private consultation with an expert Walgreens pharmacist today.
Blog Talk Radio.
Namaste, everyone. On March 11, 2015, this is Nature of Reality Radio. I am your host, Andrew Fisher, doing only a one-hour show today with Jim Self of MasteringAlchemy.com. He was in an interview on the In5D radio program. I also recently watched parts 1 and 2 of What is Consciousness, a couple webinars on his channel. Mastering Alchemy on YouTube, and as usual, we will be exposing the true and false nature of reality for what it is and what it isn't on my show today, from a dimensions of consciousness standpoint. Although I'll try not to discuss too much of things that he's already discussed in previous interviews. One thing I don't like to do on the show is discuss stuff that's already been heard on other radio interviews. If I could easily just pinpoint my source, so we'll try to do some new things today. I'm only going to cover the news for a quick 5 minutes here. Got to do it on the fly. I think that's him in the queue there, area code 208. Jim, if that is you. By the way, just want to point out I would like to give you a second hour or so in the 5 minutes or so that I'm doing the news here. I can give you a second hour of showtime on any day of the week except Wednesday. In the 3-hour time window of 6 to 9 p.m. Eastern, I can give you 1 hour of time in that 3-hour time frame, 6 to 9 p.m. Eastern on any day of the week except Wednesday. So if you want to maybe think of another day that we can do a second hour, great, because I don't want to upload this interview to YouTube until I give you a second hour and can combine both interviews into one before I upload it onto YouTube. But anyway, with that said, we'll talk about that, I guess, at the end of the show, Jim. Got to start with the news, courtesy of Alex Jones and Company at InfoWars. Article number 1, Apple admits Siri voice data is being sent to third parties. The company is following same process that caused Samsung privacy controversy. Well, didn't Edward Snowden recently say that Apple's iPhones have something that gives something to the NSA that was not known? Well, people already knew about that. He just said it, so more people are aware of it. And Snowden, why don't you just release everything all at once? Oh, yeah, that's right. Sherry Edwards told me in my recent interview with her that he's using all that info as a cloak around him to protect him. If you try to harm me, I'm going to release info about you. I still wish he would just release it all, but I don't think he needs to do that to protect himself. But anyway, Apple, thank you for playing the role of whistleblower and ratting yourself out. We appreciate that. Our next article, Council on Foreign Relations. Support al-Qaeda to defeat ISIS. The U.S., quote, will be better served by keeping the terrorist organization afloat. Yes, ISIS and al-Qaeda are the same, so that makes absolutely no sense. And the Council on Foreign Relations, major Illuminati front to push global totalitarian government plots. So don't believe that. This is all a scam. Next article, slap in the face. The sheriff ordered to remove American flag from courthouse. The sheriff says he's ready to go to jail over flag dispute. Yes, they say, F the police. Well, the sheriff, you have to understand, has the authority to keep the government, the federal government, out of your community. So you don't want to have a sheriff, folks, by all means, and one who will not abuse his authority, of course. And about moving our American flag, ordered to do it because, wow, my God, try to piss off the American people. Fuck the police. No. We want a sheriff. So this sheriff, you the man. All right, next article. The feminists promote gender stereotypes on period pad messages posted in public. They use KKK and Nazis, feminists using stereotypes to promote their agenda. Here we go, the feminists again. So Alex Jones sure likes to talk about feminists a lot. Maybe you should start talking about masculists, people who try to put down the males, because everybody talks about suppressing the female energy on Mother Earth. But hey, there's also suppression of the masculine energy, which is what the New Age movement does. Check out Mark Passio's presentation for that, a 7-hour presentation on YouTube, definitely worth watching. So, and now this whole thing about promoting gender stereotypes to divide and conquer us. Sick. Our next article, video, cop attacked student at school. Boy fought back because he was choking to death. The officials attempted to cover up the incident. Well, of course, they're going to cover up the incident. The cops, they tell us, if you've got nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear, but they're the ones who always have something to hide. Well, good job, boy, fighting back. If a cop actually uses more force than necessary to arrest you, you do have the right to kill the police officer, but in this day and age, the courts may not side with you with that, so you'd be much better off submitting to the arrest than trying to fight back, and certainly not killing the cop, even though there's plenty of case law to back up the fact you do have the right to do that. All right, anyway, next article. Montel Williams says Alex Jones, quote, inspires people to blow things up. The 90s talk show host and bizarre Twitter outburst. I never watched Montel Williams, but is he a globalist frontman because he's against Alex Jones? I don't know. Maybe he just... someone who had on my show, John Nicholson, is a little anti-Alex Jones because he thinks he scares people too much. But hey, sometimes fear-mongering is good for waking people up. I would say that. All right, next article. Second Amendment activists force ATF to shelve Obama ammo ban. 80,000 Americans bombard government with complaints. Yes, there's going to be no ammo ban. They're not going to take our guns. The New World Order will never take order because they can't disarm the American people, and that's their biggest threat to their agenda, the Second Amendment. And we're not going to give that up. You fail with Sandy Hook. Well, you failed staging Sandy Hook to take our guns. It ain't going to work. All right, one last article here. Hillary can't escape her past. Too many skeletons in the closet to keep that door closed. Yes, Hillary is a total fraud. Sherry Edwards told me all about that in my interview with her about her voice and Hillary's voice. And I remember David Icke's documentary, Revelations of a Mother Goddess, when Arizona Wilder told David of who people that were reptilian aliens that she saw at ceremonies. And she said, I saw Hillary Clinton before I knew she was Hillary Clinton. Creepy, eh? All right, so without a lot of guests, including Gemini Moon. How you doing? But anyway, can't talk to the chat just yet. I'll get in there in a little bit, but glad to see you're there. A lot of guests, too. Jim Self, is that you, that Erica 208?
It is.
How you doing? Glad to have you on. We've only got an hour today. I guess at the end of the show we'll talk about scheduling the second hour, but let's get right to it. I see here you have expanded into relationships with the Archangels, Ascended Masters, and Teachers of Light. Okay, what's the difference between Archangels, Ascended Masters, and Teachers of Light? Compare and contrast, please.
Let me ask you, where do you want to go with this interview?
Well, we're just going to ad-lib something and let our guardian angels and spirit guides guide us. And then, like I said, I want to give you a second hour, and then we'll do the same thing.
No.
You don't want to do another show?
No. Well,
okay.
Well, let's figure where we're going right here, because see what is the agenda? And so if you're asking me, how does consciousness work and what is consciousness about, one of the things that I'm going to tell you is how you hold your attention on something is what you draw to you. It's kind of real fundamental. It's called the law of attraction. Very, very fundamental, very, very accurate. So if the intention is to talk about how bad everything is, what do you think you're going to draw to you if, in fact, the law of attraction was not something that was fabricated, but actually was the vehicle that allowed you to change the focus on consciousness?
Okay, well, let me tell you, Jim, the only reason I say this kind of stuff is because I realize in this matrix you can't entirely focus on the positive. You have to acknowledge the negative exists because, well, that's how things work. I mean, you can say we're on a positive
who said
timeline.
that? Who said so? Who said so?
Mark
who told you that's how it works?
Yeah,
that's how it works.
Mark Cassio's 7-hour presentation, New Age Deception and the Suppression of the Sacred Masculine. He talks about how you can't expect to save the world by sitting in a lotus flower position for 8 hours every single day. You have to get out, be active, and acknowledge bad things and do what Alex Jones does every so often and talk about scary stuff sometimes to wake up the sheeple.
No, I missed that one.
Oh,
but
okay.
I understand. I understand what you're saying. So, but my question to you is, what if, in fact, you began to recognize that consciousness doesn't work like we think it works in this third-dimensional reality that we play the game in all day long? What if there was something that allowed you to shift out of the consciousness of good, bad, right, wrong, should, shouldn't, blame, guilt, those kind of things? What do you really want to accomplish? And so if the question to me is, what do you want to accomplish, and how is the vehicle that begins to allow you to accomplish it, then you have to kind of begin to look at it a little different way. So from the standpoint of your intro comment, I hang out with the Archangels. So for the most part, you have no idea what that means, and neither does most anybody else, because there's a perception of what that is from the perception. It's kind of like looking at something through a filter and then believing what you're seeing is the truth and then beginning to construct your reality around that filtered perception. In my reality, one of the things that happens is the archangelic realm is a realm of beings of consciousness that don't hang out in the third dimension. And the third dimension is a place that has got so much contrast and distortion that it really doesn't work well. Now, all you have to do is look around and ask yourself, does it work well? But if you simply said to yourself, what do you want? What do you want as an individual? How would you like your life to be as an individual? Now, if people were all wound up, they're going to kind of both throw energy and spew out what they think. But if you get a person who gets quiet, sits down, and you really say to them right to where they are sitting, being conscious, what do you want? What would you like if your world was the way you wanted it? And virtually everybody would tell you, I want to be happy. I want to be in relationship with people where I laugh, I have a good time, it's enjoyable, and there's words like appreciation, and I can enjoy beauty, and I can go for a walk, and I can be pleased with myself. Virtually everybody will tell you that from that place of being quiet, asking them. But once a person starts to move away from that, they get very engaged in the noise and the motion of what's going on. And then pretty soon, the only thing you talk about is, ain't it awful how bad it is? But my question to you is, if the law of attraction was accurate, if that really fundamental law of attraction that says, what you put your attention on, I, the universe, who absolutely adores you, will provide you. What if that was true? Now, see, there's a little caveat to that right at the beginning, because if that's true, the next thing that person who's out a little further than themselves throwing rocks at everything is going to say, well, shit, it doesn't work, because here, I look at all the stuff that I'm looking at. But the law of attraction says what you put your attention on is what I will provide you as the universe. See, the universe also doesn't, or the average person, or the universe, doesn't understand English, Spanish, French, German, etc. What the universe understands, what the higher dimensions understand, is how you hold a thought and how you draw an emotion to it. And so when people are reckless, when people are reactionary, when people are throwing energy all the time, when people can't manage a thought because they see something and they're constantly in reaction, and they're in that place of how awful it is, what if the universe what if the law of attraction works exactly perfectly? You get what you put your attention on. Is that possible?
Oh, yeah, yes, of course it is. But here's an interesting question I guess I could ask you. Maybe you could, since you're an expert on this subject, provide a more clear-cut answer. There's been a little bit of debate in this entertaining question. We'll get back to the Archangels, Ascended Masters, and Teachers of Light thing in a moment. But just for the hell of it, I've heard a little bit of debate on the question of, let's say you as a human, you run into a malevolent reptilian alien. It's like a Tyrannosaurus Rex there right in front of you, and you're about to be torn to shreds. Some people have said different things about this. One person said, just love the monster. Radiate love, radiate energy, and the monster will not attack you because it can't stand love. But some other people, like ET contactee Alex Collier, have said, no, don't even bother getting metaphysical, don't bother getting heartwarming. You're going to be torn to shreds in a heartbeat. They'll drink your blood like a drunken sailor. There's no hope for you because, well, it doesn't work like that. So we obviously have a little contradiction here, and all these people that say, well, you have to acknowledge negative things exist in order to defeat those negative things would say that anyone that says just love the monster and you'll be fine is a lunatic. So what do you have to say about this little debate here that I just threw out?
The debate is bullshit. So
okay.
What if, in fact, you simply see what happens in a third-dimensional reality, which is where most everybody plays that holds these kind of positions you're talking about. It's simply a reactionary state. It's a state of duality, good, bad, right, wrong, should, shouldn't is the game. What if there was a third choice? What if there was more than good and bad and right and wrong? And when you think about good and bad, who told you good and bad in the first place? So where did that good and bad come from?
Well, that's a good question because some people like Dolores Cannon, the late Dolores Cannon, have said fear is an illusion, but some other people that I've had on my show, like Jay Parker, who was a victim of trauma-based mind control, said, I would think it would be crazy to say fear is an illusion. That's a bad way of looking at it. Well, it's a point of view issue, but I guess the truths we cling to are dependent on our point of view, as Obi-Wan Kenobi once said. So.
Yes, I go along with Obi. So what happens, though, is fear is not an illusion. Fear is a very, very, very real thing in this third-dimensional reality. One of the things that happens, too, is fear doesn't even exist in a fifth-dimensional reality. So, well, how's that possible? How can it be black and white? How can it be here but not there? Partly the answer to that question is what you put your attention on is what you attract to you. Now, so there's a big guy beating up a little guy in the front yard, and you have this belief that says big guys beating up on little guys is really not a good thing. So you take a step forward. But as soon as you take the step forward, you go, oh, wait, shit, this isn't a good idea. That big guy is going to beat the heck out of me if I take a step forward. So in that moment, you are really in a quandary. And that's the moment you're talking about here, good and bad and fear and all of those kind of things. But what happens is if on that morning you woke up and you said, geez, this is really a wonderful world I live in. It's really a nice day. And I think I want to experience something new. And instead of walking down the street like you do every single day because you believe that's the only way you can get to where you're going, and your habit, which is unconscious repetitiveness, drives you down that street every single day. But this day you wake up and you have a different thought. You say, God, it's really beautiful out. This is a nice day. I think I'm going to walk a different path. You walk that different path and you don't come across that big guy beating up that little guy, which in fact is going on right at that minute. But it's not going on in your reality, because you simply choose a different set of thoughts and emotions that begin to create the reality. So see, when you start to talk about consciousness, you can't talk about consciousness from everybody else's book, because pretty much everybody's making it up based on the book that they read the day before somebody else. So when you really get to the place of asking the question, what is consciousness? What is the world I'd like to live in? How do I simply begin to transition from what is to what is possible? See, when you begin to ask that question, you start to have very different experiences. See, it's in that place you can begin to very much start to entertain the concept of archangelic realms, ascended masters, lords of light. You can begin to consider that might be possible, because that's the space you start to have experience and consciousness. But when you hold your attention on, ain't it awful, and the big guy's going to beat up the bad guy, little kid, and I have to do something, but I'm going to get beat up if I step into the middle of it. How do you like living in that space? Because it's repetitive and it repeats itself every single day for that kind of thinking pattern.
Right. But I will acknowledge that listening to Alex Jones for a little while did make a man out of me, listening to his fear-mongering. So kind of as a tribute to him, I do feel an obligation to give out his news as a news source at the beginning of my show. But by the way, I see we have a caller in the queue, area code 214. I'll get you on at 6:45 p.m. Eastern. Just want to get some information out on this show first. But hey, you would be first up. But anyhow, Jim, I'd like to ask about archangels, ascended masters, and teachers of light. Just enlighten us on what those are. And the archangels, that's kind of interesting, because a lot of people think of archangels as bad because arch, as in archon, as in malevolent. But people say, no, there's good archangels and bad archangels. So maybe you can clear up the confusion on that with the archangels and also ascended masters and teachers of light. Please enlighten us.
So you're asking me the third dimension duality question, good and bad archangels and all those kind of things. So how do you get to the place that there's a good or a bad archangel? How do you come to that conclusion? Oh, well I read the Bible, somebody said, because when I read the Bible, or at least when I talked to somebody who talked to somebody who talked to somebody, they said that the archangels caused the fall of consciousness. Well, what is the fall of consciousness? Nobody has a clue. And so all you're doing is speculating on somebody else's concept of what it should be or shouldn't be, with no foundation or no reality or no aspect of sitting down and asking yourself, what if you had all the answers? What if that concept of the answer is within you might be accurate? How many times do you look inside to find the answer? So good archangels, bad archangels, doesn't play out that way. There are no bad archangels. But see, that's who I hang out with, so I can only tell you what I know from my experience.
Okay, thanks. And also, let's move on to Ascended Masters. I remember Akashic Records reader Andrew Bartzis, who is my personal favorite source of info on the show because he's a galactic historian and the Akashic Records allegedly cannot be tampered with, so he seems probably like the best source of information in my book to get to use as a source because of his Akashic skills, and he's a good one at that. He talked about how sometimes he scanned the earth and found that many ascended masters who have incarnated as humans here, they are actually just running basic sheeple-like lives, living 9-to-5 jobs and everything, not realizing that they're here to serve a purpose. Seems kind of counterintuitive that they would do that, but hey, I'm assuming that is the case. So what are Ascended Masters, and why would an Ascended Master want to incarnate in someone who really isn't doing much to wake up society like that?
Well, he's accurate. There are Ascended Masters that are living in bodies that don't have a real consciousness of themselves being Ascended Masters. So what if you came and what if you decided you were going to have a set of experiences and you wanted to actually experience those experiences in the experience, not skewed by what you know or what you think. You would like to go out and have the legitimate experience of the experience. So a lot of these, there are not a lot of them, but those that are walking on the earth, many of them are simply back in a body learning things. One of the things that happens is that aspect of learning things begins to have value as you play again a little bit later in life. So you learn something, you bump your nose, you really have a bad time, you don't have a good relationship, you do all those things. But as you grow and as you start to pay attention to yourself, you realize a lot of times those bad experiences are the experiences that allow you to make good decisions and have good experiences. One of the things that I'm aware of is in my personal life, when I look back at the various things that I have had the experience of doing, there's a level of boredom that has run through my life. And it's boredom in some very interesting places. It was boredom that I experienced quite an office as an elected official on the San Jose City Council at 24 years old for 8 years. It was boredom that moved through my space when I sat as the Director of Governmental Operations for the Department of Energy in D.C. It was boredom that ran through my space when I worked as an advisor to the President of the United States. Now, how can you have boredom in those spaces? Seems like it should be counterintuitive. You're right in the middle of all the action of doing all kinds of things and creating things. But that boredom led me to believe or understand really clearly that mostly I was not in agreement with how the game was being played. But what it did allow me to do is begin to have the experience of the experience. And it gave me enough insight to basically recognize how to play that game, but not play that game. And so it created great value in my personal reality in terms of how to teach, how to communicate, how to work with energy, how to alter the direction of a meeting with conscious intention and thought. How do you basically change the dynamic so it's not competitive and two heads butting against each other? How do you create a reality that begins to be 1 + 1 = 3, and you take the reality to a higher road of opportunity to complete something? So all those states of boredom as a human being was something that I was experiencing, but simultaneously all of those events gave me a great amount of awareness on how to move around in my life. That's what other Ascended Masters would tell you. I don't know anything about being an Ascended Master myself, but hanging out with those beings, some of them in bodies, most of them not in bodies, they would give you a similar answer.
Hey, thanks, Jim. One thing you've talked about before, but I think for the purposes of this interview, I'd like to bring up again. The subject of what happened on December 21st, 2012. I'd like to tell you what two other people said happened on that date, and then you tell me what you have said happened on that date, and then maybe you can explain how it maybe might tie into those other people. First of all, Andrew Bartzis, that Akashic Records reader, said that was the date where the first time ever we all got to experience universal dream time. We weren't consciously aware of it happening, but basically what happened in that brief moment where we experienced universal dream time, we for all intents and purposes, got to decide I'm going to move on and expand my consciousness and expand love through our consciousness, or I'm going to be a sheeple and do nothing. That's in a nutshell. It's more complicated than that, but that's it in a nutshell. And every, I think, equinox, solstice, and maybe even every full moon, we're also experiencing dream time, but for the first time ever, it happened on that date. And also, Andromeda Council contactee Tolak, he said on that date, the galactic alignment caused massive amounts of energy to hit the Earth, and the Earth's core blossomed into a fourth dimensional core, and over the course of time, all of planet Earth and also everything on the Earth will go into a fourth dimensional and ultimately a fifth dimensional consciousness. So that's what those people have said. Are they right? And if they are, how does it maybe tie into what you have said happened on that day?
They are right. Now, would I agree with those wordings? And so let's just decide that language sometimes gets in the way of being able to be in agreement or communicate. But both of what you just represented is actually very correct. So in my simple way of saying it, basically a period of time ended and a new period of time began. But in that context of shifting, it's as if you just upgraded your computer. You know, you put in a new operating system, and one of the things that the operating system does is once you load it in, it says, here, just take a minute, let me kind of organize myself here, the operating system says. And then it says, okay, I've got it together, now we're going to restart the computer. And so in a way, there was a period of time where that organization has been happening since really about the year 2000, actually really from 1988. But again in 2000 through 2011, 2012. Then that 2012, December 2012 period happened. Two things happened. One of them happened on 12/12, and one of them happened on 12/21, and it had to have that little bit of space between it. But basically on 12/12, what occurred was the ending of what is known as the third dimension. Now, the trees, the chair, the table you're leaning on, the computer, all of those things are form. So let's not call that third dimension. Those are the props and the staging and the backdrop that allow you to play out your play and have an experience. But the trees and the house, that's all the props to allow you to have your experience. But one of the things that happened, the third dimension is a physical dimension. The fourth dimension is a conscious dimension. It is no physicalness at all. The fifth dimension is a physical dimension. But what happened in 12/12 is at that particular point, the third dimension, the game of linear time, the game of right and wrong and dualities, that state where you get into present time, but for the most part you aren't conscious choosing present time, you are in reaction in present time, meaning, oh my God, this wasn't supposed to happen, now what am I going to do? Reactionary present time. That's linear time is a third dimension application. Time is applications. It's not fixed. It's there for your use when you understand it. But you, in a third dimensional space, all of the aspect of man's inhumanity to man to a great extent came to an end. Now, but you say, well, Jim, wait, 12/13 came and people were still out there killing each other. Correct. But basically what happened is that third dimension ended. In our reality, where we played on that moment, at that period of time, right after that 12/12 moment at noon, roughly, Metatron, one of the archangelic lords of light, came forth and said, from this moment on, there will never be a child born again into the third dimension. Now, this is a bigger run out of information, but keeping it simple. The fourth dimension is where you have thoughts that never make it into a third dimensional experience. So you think about killing somebody, but you don't. The thought stays in that fourth dimensional space. So a simple question is, where do you think thoughts go when you're done thinking the thought you were just thinking? They don't go poof and go away. They are tangible thought form. They just are not physical. But in that fourth dimension, all the thoughts ever thought that haven't been brought into a physical application by you and by everybody else who have ever thought thoughts is stored in that fourth dimensional space. So the third dimension has come to an end, but because we don't get it, we still think it's going on. We continue to play in it as it is going on. But in that space, that was one of the things that happened on 12/12. On 12/21, effectively an entirely new operating system was put into engagement. And so people right now are still operating on the beliefs that everything is the same as it was prior to 12/12. But for the most part, that new operating system is just like a dawning of a new day. It takes, you can ever try to watch dawn happen, it just moves so slowly. But if you just closed your eyes for 30 seconds and opened them again, it would be very clear something's different. But trying to watch time change, it's a challenge to do that. But what has occurred is in that new operating system, basically you're in a shift. You're no longer looking at the same thing you've been looking at in your history of your life or the history of humanity. And so you're starting to see things happen. Right now it's a little bit challenging because everything is coming out of you. So you can't take your baggage with you on this journey to the fifth dimension. Fear does not exist there. Trust, safety aren't even words in the fifth dimension because there's nothing unsafe and there's nothing to distrust. How would that be? Wouldn't that be a lovely place to go and play in your everyday life? But see, what happens in order to get there, you can't take your baggage with you. So you're beginning to see the world shedding its thoughts that they think but have never acted on. Many of those thoughts are creating such anger and violence and rage that they are beginning to be acted upon. What's interesting, it's what I said right at the beginning of the show, the law of attraction. You attract to you what you think. So isn't it interesting, you've got all of this Middle East and ISIS and many of these places where there's anger and hate and rage beginning to be even more predominant than it was just a couple of years ago. And it will continue for about the next 6 years, getting worse and worse, getting more choices, more anger. But at the same time, you're finding the new operating system within you is starting to say, this isn't right. This is not acceptable. I want to see something different. And people are starting to stand up, but they're not standing up as you presented it in the beginning where let's go kick ass and we got to show them who's boss. What it is going to happen is people are not going into withdrawal and fear and letting the monster eat them either. What's beginning to happen is simply people saying, I'm not going to play at this anymore. The challenge right now is people don't have the awareness to make a different set of decisions because I have my habits and my beliefs. But in my reality, where I play with hundreds and thousands of people and I begin to give them a different set of choices to choose from, they find that they're not stuck in black and white. It doesn't go to gray. It goes to levels of discernment and choice and creation. Graciousness, well-being, gratitude. There are other choices than anger and rage and throw rocks.
Yes, indeed there are. And in regards to the future, people are talking about, everybody's talking about, it seems like 2017 will be a year of great consciousness shift. Now, whenever I talk about this subject on my show, I always warn people, hey, don't get a couch potato attitude and think, well, I don't have to do jack shit until 2017 or even later than that because we're going to be saved, we're going to ascend into the fifth dimension and everything's going to be great. No, folks, you got to do your part to make it happen. And, well, it seems like everybody's saying that by the fifth dimension, like some ETs are going to show themselves, we're going to go to gold-backed currency, and over the course of time we'll get into no currency. And, well, other people like Bashar, I spoke to Daryl Anka, who channels Bashar, at a recent conference that I was at, and he told us, in response to whatever question was that I asked him, he said, you will remain in the in physicality for another 1,000 years. In that time, you will move in and out of different densities. And he said that there's a difference between dimension and density. He said you can think of dimensions as a country and densities as different states within that country. So that brings up the question of what different densities and dimensions are. We'll get to that in a little bit. But that whole thing about 2017 being a year of great consciousness shift, that seems to conflict with Bashar said about how we will remain in physicality for another 1,000 years. Could you maybe settle the debate on what these people are trying to say here?
No, I can't settle the debate, but I can tell you Bashar is correct.
Okay. How do you know that?
So why am I on your show? How do I know that? So if you call me to be on your show because I hang out with the archangelic realms and the lords of light, and I have an access into that consciousness, and when I go to sleep at night, I know where I go when I go to sleep. And when I come back, I remember where I've been. So if you accept that as potentially something that might be possible, then basically the question of how do I know that, in terms of what Bashar is saying is accurate, comes from where I gather what I know. Am I right? I don't know. Am I telling you some truth? I don't know. You're asking me what I know, and all I'm doing is representing to you based on how I have interaction and awareness. I can simply tell you what I know. I can also tell you there are multiple layers of consciousness within consciousness, and there are now many stratas of consciousness that are happening. So a person who holds, let me just see if I can make it simple. So let's say there's 100 layers of thought, and the ugliest layers are 1 and the most beautiful are at 100. There are also, let's say, 50 layers of consciousness in that range. And so there'll be people that will hang out in a certain range, and in that range they will grow. And they will be conscious of the range below them, and they'll be consciousness of a range above them, more or less. Just like all of us, we drive through parts of a city, and in one part of the city on our way to work, it's beautiful and has got a lot of wealth. Another part of the city we might drive through is very impoverished and has a lot of poor people, uneducated experiences. And so you've got these different levels, but you might pass through these different segments of that town, of these levels of consciousness, but your level of consciousness is somewhere within those many layers. So you become conscious of great wealth, you become conscious of great poverty, but what is about to happen, or what is happening, those extremes, great wealth, great poverty, actually are not even going to become important to you. You're going to begin to start to function in vibrational fields of consciousness that allow you to begin to be more conscious, choosing a life that you wish to learn, wish to play in, wish to experience. Some people will still play in levels of push and shove. Some peoples will begin to find that the word gratefulness and gratitude and appreciation, beauty, well-being as a state of being. Some will begin to recognize that they can change the level of the molecular structure of the physical body by altering how you think and hold consciousness. That's really pretty cool stuff, but you just don't get there. See, so that grouping of people who believe that, I'm going to hang out until 217 and then I'm going to be given the keys to the heaven, don't hold your breath. Some assembly required, and there is no free lunch on this journey. So where you hang out is exactly where that law of attraction is going to even more aggressively provide for you. So if your thinking structure is push and shove and get even and revenge, good luck with that, because that's what you will attract to you. If your intention is to begin to find ease and well-being and co-creation and cooperation and begin to allow some of these new technologies that will show up on the planet to take hold, you're going to be mesmerized in some most wonderful things. But many will not see any of those things because that strata of choice is going to begin to be a little bit more structured so that you can learn and then step into another strata. But the wide range of stratas that people have available to them are going to begin to be somewhat, I don't want to say restricted, but somewhat structured so that you don't have those wide ranges of choice until you choose. Does that make any sense to you?
Oh, of course. It makes perfect sense. Everything you're saying makes sense. A lot of people who are stuck in third-dimensional thinking, this is going to fly over them. But, hey, we fully understand it, as do all the people listening. And there's a lot of listeners in the chat room. You're a very popular guy. Glad to see that. All right, so where do I want to go next? I wanted to see dimension and density. There's a lot of confusion. You seem to, from your previous talk, suggest there is a difference between dimension and density. Could you briefly tell us what the difference is between those two terms?
Density is a level of consciousness. Dimension is a strata of creation. So let me say it this way in simple terms. Dimensions are like classrooms that some things happen. You take an algebra class, then you take a calculus class, then you take a quantum physics class. They all happen in different classrooms. But the level of density is about consciousness. See, the consciousness in third dimension is the most dense there is of consciousness. And so in that space, how you think, how fluid, how much permission, how much joy, how much opportunity, how much you are able to listen to others and co-communicate with them, that's really pretty restricted in this third dimensional reality, because the consciousness is very, very compressed. Light is compressed. Consciousness is light. And so when you get scientists saying, well, the speed of light is the game, it's so far off. Speed of light is the slowest movement of light there is. It's where light begins to have two configurations, wavelengths and particles. And when a wavelength of light condenses, it's like water condensing to ice. It moves from a flowing frequency range into a condensed density or particle. And so we live in a physical configuration. We think it's the whole game in town, physicalness. But in fact, or at least from my agreement with listening to Metatron and Uriels and others, physicalness they've defined as a single drop of water in the greatest of all the oceans that there is. Everything is non-physical in all that is. Physicalness was an experience, a creation, an experiment. But we only know what we know. We don't know what we don't know. And so what makes it so challenging is this aspect, as this computer, as this software program, the shift of consciousness is shifting, the operating system, the computer is shifting. We're only in the very beginning stages of that, so it's still very hard to see where it's going. 12, 12, 12. But what's basically happening is as that density is beginning to decompress a little bit, the ability to start to choose other choices is beginning to become aware to us in consciousness. But particle levels of physicalness is simply so condensed consciousness that we get stuck in doing kind of what you're doing here with me and with others, is trying to figure out who knows something. But it's really more or less in who knows something, this kind of a conversation, to a great extent is really pretty useless, because it's like the five blind men trying to define the universe of the elephant by that little part that they can hold in one hand. We are so limited to the capacity of beginning to understand how things work. and how consciousness is. But at the other side of it, it's really very exciting because shows like yours are starting to get people to think, gee, do I really like this? You know, how good it is, how bad it is, how stupid people are. Why is this lying to me? People are going to start to get tired of that in this spiritual movement, I would hope. Because in that process, there is no answer. There is anxiety. There is aggravation. There is uncomfortableness. There's anger and rage in all of this. But how's it working for you? Where are you going with it? What are you trying to accomplish? How is that life that you're using every minute of the day by being angry at somebody for something? It's the Illuminati. Yeah, well, have you ever met the Illuminati? Who gives a shit? Are you going to change them? Are you going to make a difference to them? How does it feel running that anger and hatred through your body all day long? In this period of time that's coming, people are going to start to say, this sucks. What am I doing with my life? I'm angry. I'm outraged. I'm uncomfortable. I'm not focused on anything. I'm not making any money. I hate my job. Bosses suck. How does that feel? Do you really want to spend your whole life in those energies, which I guarantee you in the days to come become layers of thought, and the ones that play in there are the ones that play in there. Nothing else happens in there. It's like going to a party and everybody says, ain't it awful? And then you go home. How did you enjoy the party? Unfortunately, for most who choose to play here, the party doesn't end. It wakes up with you the next day over and over and over until you decide to just choose. To choose is a fourth dimensional concept, not a third dimensional concept. In choice, you begin to find yourself in present time. In reaction, you can be in present time, but you're worrying about the past and hoping the future doesn't bite you in the ass. That's what the third dimension is. Worry about what they told me and hope it doesn't happen, or be really nervous about these bad things I did in my past, and I certainly hope they don't get me in my future. How do you like that life? There's no present time creative activity in the third dimensional time configuration. But you live in a fourth dimension as well as a third dimension. Every once in a while you sit back. Every once in a while you simply take a breath. Every once in a while you have a different thought. Every once in a while you choose a different direction to go. What's going to happen to many who are playing this game of being angry at everything, yes, there are bad guys out there. They're playing in their strata. Yes, there are people who are stealing from you out there. They're playing in their strata. Yes, the government of the United States is going to steal your money at some point in time. Yes, it's going to happen. It's in a different strata. Unless you choose to hold your attention, law of attraction, on ain't it so awful? You know, right inside, buried well inside a program called the Dodd-Frank bill that regulates banks and finances, there's a little one-liner that says the banks have the authority, if they really get in trouble, which they're going to take your money. It's in the legislation. It's called bail-ins. The bank can take your checking account and your savings. The European Union, the European Central Bank, floated that last year when Cyprus was in serious trouble. They basically said to Cyprus, yeah, take the citizens' money. You owe us money. You need to pay our... And it was like stepping across a red line. And everybody who knew that red line kind of took a deep breath and said, are you sure you want to go here? But it was too late. They crossed the line. In the crossing of the line, the ability of governments to give banks permission to take your savings and checking account. That's going to happen. Unless you decide you don't want to hold your attention there. Now, that statement doesn't mean run to the bank, take your money out, put it under your mattress. That's not what I said. I'm just telling you that these layers of consciousness are beginning to be very well defined, and those who play in the layer they choose are going to have the resources of the layer and the results of that layer of consciousness. So how do you want to choose this life that you are about to spend going forward? Angry, rageful, resentful, pushing against? Or take a deep breath and recognize that's all in different stratas. Those are all games, I'm going to use that word positively, that every spiritual being comes into a body to play in order to theoretically gain wisdom. That foundation is shifted with 12:12, 12:21. It's beginning to operate in a different construct. There's no reason to continue that state held in the fall of consciousness called the third dimension, density compression of consciousness. How do you choose?
Well, it's up to the people to make their decision. Jim, we do have 10 minutes left until the live feed will come off. We can go past that if you need to go just a little over an hour to finish up a thought or something. But I do have a caller here in the queue. Want to get him on. Area code 214. You are on the air. What's your name? Where you're from? What's your question? Or are you just listening? All right, I guess they're just listening. All right. So that being said, Jim, I guess I'll finish up with you. Want to get past the fifth dimension for a little bit because I've heard from some people that Earth was created as a seventh dimensional seed planet. And what's significant about the seventh dimension? Well, I seem to recall hearing from some people that once you get to the seventh dimension, there is no more service to self. The fourth, the fifth, and the sixth do have some degree of service to self in them, but once you get to the seventh, there is no more service to self. Is that true? And if so, maybe give your words of education on that subject.
Interesting that you would say that. There is some accuracy to that. It is the Earth is a 12th dimensional planet. It is what has been created as a very unique planet. It's created in that state of Christ consciousness. It is an experiment, one of 12 experiments in all physicalness. The Earth has not accomplished what it was set out to have the Earth accomplish. So in that context, in the fall of consciousness, which was very real, very misunderstood, the very limited awareness of what that is, there are 12 dimensions in physicalness. In the fifth, sixth, and seventh dimension, you can become fully conscious. There is no fear. There is no all that third dimensional noise. It is a place where you start to hold a level of both love and light that is not experienced in a third and fourth dimension. But in that fifth dimension, you begin to have a decompressed density, so you have much more of a vast awareness of consciousness than you can accomplish in a third or fourth dimension, because the density is decompressed. You have more knowledge, more light, more love, more awareness. One of those aspects is there is a component of the Creator that is called Christed consciousness. Now, in this context, it's not about a man and it's not about a religion. It's an aspect, an expression of Creator. In that aspect, you begin to have the capacity to accomplish that living light body in a fifth dimensional space. Very important creation opportunity. But in a fifth dimensional space, in the fifth, sixth, and seventh dimensional awareness, those three dimensions, there is an aspect of being a collective consciousness, not the drop of water of the oceans, but how the ocean moves and functions as an ocean. So you know everything that goes on as the ocean knows everything. And you can choose to be that unique reflection of the Creator, reflecting back to the Creator what the Creator is in that singularity. So you get to play both In the fifth dimension, you have more of a physical expression and consciousness and that sense of service to others and service to one. In that seventh dimension, that individual reality is known, it would be like me saying to you, have you ever played soccer? And you say, I've watched it on television. So that collective nature is a unit of consciousness that has an awareness of soccer, has the awareness of individuality. What makes going into this fifth dimensional living light body and consciousness so fascinating for me, as I'm just kind of talking for me, is in that place you get to play in physicalness from that Christed state of awareness, the love of the Creator, the light of the Creator, and the consciousness of all that is, and draw from it to create a creation in physicalness. That structure was the intention of where that before the fall of consciousness. It is now with that 2012 operating system shift available to every single being on the planet. Most are too asleep. Most are more interested in third dimension arguing and pushing and the energy that gets all revved up around that, black and white, good and bad, right and wrong. But when you start to take it to that higher road and you begin to recognize tools, applications, skills, choices, and you begin to raise the physicalness of the body to a molecular state of light, that doesn't mean you walk through walls. It means you just make the physicalness operate differently. You begin to have access to all that goes on in that fifth and sixth and seventh dimension. You begin to have the skills, the knowledge of all that is in a physical expression of the Creator back to the Creator. That's what Mastering Alchemy is all about. That's what we teach.
Thanks for making clear what alchemy was, Jim. Okay, just so you know, we have 3 minutes and 30 seconds left until the live feed is up. So one thing I'd like to talk about is a revolutionary new thing that seems to be going on, service to self-ascension. Andrew Bartzis has talked about 15 beings that he say are the reason why the Archon control system and all the bad things that go on this planet are here. They're the ones who imposed that, these 15 beings. But he said recently that there are now only 8 of those beings because the other 7 underwent a revolutionary new thing known as service to self-ascension. Do you have any idea how something can undergo service to self-ascension?
Yes, I can. Have you ever found that you have being very simple, taking it into third dimension, have you ever found that you had a opinion, a judgment, a belief that thing over there was bad and because it happened this way, my life is all screwed up? You ever have a belief like that? Or probably you didn't, but you've seen people who hold grudges, who hold anger, who hold resentment, and all of a sudden something happens where they find out that what they have believed and all that anger and hate that they've had directed at that thing over there or that person or that community or those people was not true. It's in that singularity, that one moment where everything you believe that was true, they did it to me, it was all about them, and you realize that's not how it happened at all. It's in that moment, even at the level of these great beings, and these are great beings. I'm not going to put a number or a validation on 15 or 8 or anything like that, but I can tell you there are really capable great beings that are very, very stuck. And so the expression of what you are saying is exactly what is in the process of occurring. There are beings that are beginning to recognize their truth that they've lived with so long is in fact not a truth. And you've had that. I've had that. Everybody has had that moment when you learn a new truth, you can't go back to the old truth. And that's what's happening to many of these beings that have been creating so much havoc in this fallen sector of the universe that is very much in quarantine because of this nature of the fall of consciousness.
Thanks a lot, Jim. All right, one more question, and then we'll call it a show. You say you don't really want to focus on negative things. Well, what about all those people that like being mad? I mean, I've told people I actually like the feeling of anger that you get, like not being angry at other people like I hate people at all, but what I'm talking about is like if you have like a tree or an iceberg on you and you have to feel a sense of anger to get that adrenaline up to get that iceberg on you, and that adrenaline makes you feel really determined and really determined to get the bad guy and all that kind of anger, if you know what I mean. Is that kind of a bad feeling to feel, or can that be beneficial in some sense if you like being mad like that?
Well, you're actually saying two things. You're saying, I believe that being mad and revving myself up from this format of being angry and enraged generates an adrenaline rush that I can find satisfaction and success. But you can create that adrenaline rush if you choose without having to be angry and mad. It's all about how you choose to focus your thought and draw an emotion to it. I can show you people that can lift that iceberg off you and simply do it from the standpoint of, isn't this going to be fun? Here, let's make this happen, and they do. So the choice of the rush and the addiction to the rush is an addiction to the adrenaline flow. It is not necessarily driven by the origin of anger. But this is a place where people say, if X, then Y. And because it's worked for me 3 times, it must be a truth. And then it drops into the nature of being a habit. And then it begins to structure your life. And you don't ever remember that you could have another choice because I'm so hooked on my adrenaline rush of anger. There are other choices.
I've no doubt there are. Jim, if you have to go, that's fine. It's just that about a few seconds before the show ended, a caller called in. Do you want to take this caller's question? If he has one for you, do you want to call it a show?
Certainly. I'll be happy to take somebody's question.
All right. This person is calling in for a question. Area code 661, you are on the air. What's your name? Where are you from? What's your question? Or are you just listening? If you are, the show's about to end, just so you know. Okay, I'll take it that they were just listening. All right, Jim. Well, that's the end of this show, and, I'm going to let you decide if you ever want to get back to me to do a second hour sometime. I will upload this interview to YouTube under the assumption that you may not be able to get that. So, but if you can, just let me know. I'm sure you have my contact information and everything. I sent it with those other messages and all. But with that being said, I guess I'll tell you the same thing I tell all of my guests. Jim, one of my goals with this show is to get as many different guests on my show as possible before I give any one specific guest double dips. And you are a fascinating individual, and I have no doubt that your knowledge and wisdom would do great to do another show with you, even a second and third show if possible. But the fact is, I will probably not in all likelihood be asking you to come on my show again because I need to give thousands of other fascinating individuals a chance to have some glory on my show.
Absolutely.
Okay, yeah, there's plenty of other people out there that need glory on my show, and I'm on a mission to get as many people on. So, Jim, it was a pleasure having you on, even though we only had an hour. I'll make sure this interview gets uploaded to YouTube and gets spread far and wide, and I do hope people get something from it. Pleasure having you on.
Have a good day, Andrew. Thank you.
You too. Take care. Folks, that is the end of this show. Next week I will be having Robert Potter on. He was saw him in an interview with Alfred Weber in the not-too-distant past, talking about how we're on a positive timeline and all, and things are going to be looking really good in your future. We'll talk about that and other things that Potter seems very intelligent on. So, Robert Potter next week. Namaste, everyone. This is Andrew Fisher signing off. Enjoy the rest of your Trek to Our Consciousness.